So the World Economic Forum has been talking for a few years now about a polycrisis. So what I expect to see, they will throw crisis after crisis after crisis at us. A currency crisis, a economic crisis, environmental crises, World War III type crises, possibly another pandemic. So when you start seeing these crises coming into view, and then you start seeing the governments of the world telling you that the only solution is to give up your freedom, to give up your national sovereignty, to give more power and authority to the very megalomaniacs who cause these things, not only should you be alarmed, you should have a very clear and very simple answer. No.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 30th to July 6th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week we feature backdated 1/10 ounce gold maples at just $45 over melt per coin. Next, 1 ounce silver Swiss Pamp rounds are just $2.59 over spot per ounce. 90% mixed junk constitutional silver is only 99 cents over spot. And finally, backdated 1 ounce platinum platypus coins are just $119 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always glad to have this widely followed returning guest. Alex Newman, a contributor at the Epoch Times and the founder of the Liberty Sentinel, is here with us again on Liberty and Finance. Today is Monday, June 30th, 2025. Alex, thank you for joining us again on Liberty and Finance.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Dunnigan.
We have several topics we want to address with you today, and the first of which is a provision in the draft that is currently being voted on and tried to get pushed through of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill in Congress, and that would include a 10-year moratorium on states' rights of restricting AI in any way for 10 years. The states would have no say-so about AI, and it could come on down through the centralized levels to affect our lives in countless ways without any influence by the states if they want to participate in any of the $500 million in infrastructure, IT infrastructure funding. So could you first talk to us about your view on why even those of us who may be late career stage or retirement age should care about AI and what is likely to be changing our lives and that of our children and grandchildren? And secondly, we'll talk about this sort of a muzzling of the states for 10 years that's included in the bill that's going to get voted on this week. Donald Trump wants it passed by the 4th of July. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Dunnigan. Great to be here, as always. I think this provision in the Big Beautiful Bill is incredibly dangerous. I mean, if you listen to the people who are pushing this, they have told us that artificial intelligence is potentially the most powerful tool in the arsenal of militaries around the world ever developed in the history of mankind. And yet here you're telling us that a state cannot, if they participate in this $500 million or $1 billion unconstitutional infrastructure funding, that they cannot put any regulatory controls on that at all. Imagine if they were to do that with nuclear bombs. Imagine if they were to do that with machine guns. Imagine if they were to do that with tanks. People would be flipping out. And when it comes to AI, sorry, state government, you cannot protect your citizens from the potential dangers of this technology. I'm not a Luddite. I do believe technology is important. I believe there are very useful applications for these things. And frankly, I think it has the potential to do incredible things for mankind. But we would also be very naive and foolish if we didn't realize that evildoers understand the potential of this technology, and they fully intend, and if you read their documents and read their speeches, they've been kind of clear about it, they fully intend to use this to monitor, surveil, and ultimately control everything about our lives, very much including the way we see the world, our opinions, our attitudes, our beliefs, our values. They want to use it in education. Trump, of course, signed a very, very significant executive order injecting AI into education. So to me, this seems like a recipe for disaster. Dunnigan, it also, not only is it unconstitutional, it is incredibly unwise, in my opinion. One of the big advantages of a federal system where states retain all powers that were not delegated to the federal government, is that the different states can experiment with different policies and see what works. We don't want to stifle innovation, but we also don't want to allow dangerous technologies to run wild in a way that might infringe on the God-given rights and liberties of the people of that state. So I think this is very, very dangerous, really concerned about this. And I think if we would go back to the U.S. Constitution, it would solve most of these problems. The federal government wouldn't be funding these things. There'd be plenty of private capital to do that. And the federal government wouldn't be telling states that they can't regulate things that may very well pose a deadly threat to the fundamental rights of their citizens.
We also wanted to talk with you about something that's been very clear and pressing concern in all of our minds over the past month in particular, and that's of hotspots breaking out across the world in no small amount in the Middle East. Do you feel that we are out of the woods yet, or what particular concerns do you have that are ongoing despite the apparent cessation of what was dubbed the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, with sort of a climactic finish by the U.S.?
Well, as Donald Trump himself pointed out, the ceasefire that he tried to negotiate was not respected, right? So we're definitely not out of the woods on this yet. And what we've seen in terms of the propaganda war is that already the establishment, the powers that be, if you will, are already agitating to still lead us into a third world war. We've seen a leak out of the Defense Intelligence Agency where they argued that, Trump's strike didn't actually do what he said it did. They've still got plenty of ability to make nuclear bombs. And this was broadcasted by the propaganda media like it was the most important news story of the day. AP had a headline, something like early U.S. intelligence reports suggest U.S. strikes only set back Iran's nuclear program by months. This sounds to me like a propaganda campaign to get us sucked into a third world war, another regime change operation. We're seeing the same thing out of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. They are saying something similar, that the Iranians have enough material to build a nuclear warhead. They don't know necessarily that they're trying to build one, but all this leads me to believe that the neoconservative globalist faction of the establishment, and maybe the Democrat part as well, are still fully intending to suck us into another war. And if they can't do it in the Middle East, I have no doubt that they'll try to get it done in Russia, Ukraine, or China, or India, Pakistan could flare up again. Donald Trump tried to douse those flames, but you never know with an Islamist government like that how quickly things can happen. And then, of course, there's the risk of the possibility of false flag attacks. So I think we're in a very dangerous situation. We know the globalists want war. We know they have told us that war is the fastest way to advance the cause of globalism. And so even if they actually, at the New American Magazine, where I serve as senior editor, as the strikes on Iran were happening, I got my copy of the issue, and it was World War III cover story. So I would encourage people to read that, because we go into why and how these globalist forces that want to undermine national sovereignty, that want to undermine individual liberty, don't just foment wars, but they exploit wars for the purpose of accomplishing their objectives. And we've got a long paper trail proving that this is what they do. They've been doing it for generations, and they will continue doing it as long as we keep getting sucked into these things. Donald Trump's instincts, I think, have been very, very good to try to steer clear of getting us sucked into one of these things. But that's going to be tough. If they were to blow something up, if there were to be a terror attack, real or staged, that could very, very easily cause a stampede into what would end up being a catastrophic global conflagration that I think the end result would be not just millions of people dead, but a rearranging of the world order in a way that would be very, very dangerous for American interests, and especially for the God-given liberties of people.
Yeah, when you mentioned a world order there, it's been said by certain guests of ours for over a decade, all wars are bankers' wars, and they talk about the globalist banks that have existed for generations, as you pointed out, who finance both sides of the war. They did it in World War II. They've done it in other wars. They have no allegiance to any particular country. They're working at a completely different level of the chessboard and playing different populations off against each other, always with loss of life and with horrific consequences, both of direct life and civilization consequences, but also loss of financial control of people's and countries' lives. Do you want to make any further comments about these globalist banks. I mean, ironically, our country, the United States, was founded in part to get away from the Bank of England. That was part of what we were objecting to, and they tried to chain down our Congress with our Constitution to prevent that from creating itself. But your thoughts on that arena?
Yeah, the bankers have been some of the key financiers of both sides on the wars going back for a very long time. And we've got massive amounts of documented evidence on that. World War II is obviously a good place to look since that totally restructured the world order last time around. I think probably the single best work on this, and there have been many great books on this, but the single best one was by Anthony Sutton over at Stanford University, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. And what he showed was that the Wall Street megabanks and the Rockefeller interests, the Morgan interests, were absolutely essential in bringing the Nazis to power. And by the way, this very much included the Bush dynasty. Senator Prescott Bush, who was a director at Union Bank in New York, was involved in financing the Nazis and in fact got in hot water with the federal government under the Trading with the Enemy Act. At the same time, we were funding the Soviet Union. We were painting Joseph Stalin as some kind of Uncle Joe. This is crazy. And yet the end result of that war, in addition to the millions of people who died, both soldiers and innocent civilians, was the birth of almost every institution you can think of today of globalism. The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Coal and Steel Community that morphed into the European Union. So I think that strategy has been so effective in the past, enslaving everybody to unpayable debt, undermining national sovereignty, rearranging the geopolitical chessboard. I mean, there's just so many benefits from their perspective, and they never go die in the wars, right? They send our kids to go die in the wars. So I would encourage people to get informed on this. We're watching something similar again, to look at the Iran issue. The current regime in Iran, which by the way is a very unsavory, nasty, vile, dangerous group of lunatics, we always forget, how did they get put into power? Well, the U.S. government put them there, is the long story short, right? The U.S. government betrayed the Shah of Iran, who was pro-American, and that resulted in the rise to power of these lunatics. We have seen the same thing over and over again, whether it's Cuba, whether it's Iran, whether it's the Bolshevik Revolution. Same pattern that we see over and over and over again. And I believe we're seeing that with Russia and Ukraine as well. Right, we see the Putin, for example, very, very close to the globalist insiders. He was a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, as Klaus Schwab proudly said at the Harvard University. So we see this over and over again, where the players on both sides are working together in many cases for these same nefarious objectives. And of course, destroying huge amounts of productive capacity, chaining everybody to unpayable debt to fight the wars has the benefit from their perspective of making everybody, as the Bible says, right, the borrower is slave to the lender, for all borrowers to pay for these wars. And then there's one more added issue here, Dunnigan, and that is the, I believe, almost inevitable economic turmoil that we're headed into with the dollar, with the markets here in the United States and around the world. What a perfect cover for the collapse of the whole house of cards of World War III, right? And then people lose sight of what's really happening, and everything can be blamed on the war. It can be blamed on freedom, national sovereignty, all those different things. And so I think people ought to be very, very focused on understanding these things and also preventing bad outcomes. And I think there's a lot of powerful people that would love to blame Donald Trump for all this. So I hope he is very, very careful about who he listens to.
Yeah, your couple of points there that you made really rang with our audience, I believe, and that is we were told, we're gonna get an audit of the gold that's in Fort Knox. We're gonna get the release of the JFK report in its entirety. We're gonna get the release of the Epstein files, and all of a sudden, oh look, there's war. We better run over here. It seems to match and mirror patterns of I won't just call it distraction, but misdirection of the duty to really run to ground important issues that have been languishing out there and getting covered, rather than really following through on promises made to people about truth and reconciliation. I don't know if you have any more comments about that. I have one more follow-up on this general topic before we leave.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, right? A lot of the great things that Donald Trump has been doing and has been trying to do, unfortunately, are being put on the back burner as a result of all this warmongering and war agitation. And it's happening across all the different fronts, right? You look at what he's trying to do on climate. All of it now is playing second fiddle to the one big beautiful bill and the war cries from the war party. And unfortunately, Donald Trump has waffled on this quite a bit. We saw just last week, he's out there saying maybe we're going to give more Patriot missiles to Ukraine. I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. I fully understand why the Ukrainians are so upset about the invasion of their country, but do we really need to get the United States sucked into another massive world war, especially when we are $40 trillion in debt with $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities? And what is that going to do to Donald Trump's efforts to drain the swamp, restore liberty, restore the Constitution, restore national sovereignty? So there are very, very dangerous efforts here to play the president. I believe, I know there's some people who think the president is working with them. I don't agree with that assessment, but I think he's going to have to be very, very careful here. We saw how easy it was during the first administration to bring him along. He went against his better instincts on the COVID issue and went along with the cries after they were loud enough for long enough. And I'm concerned that we may see that again. He has said he wants to be the peace president. He has been trying everywhere to put out the fires of war, but it doesn't seem like the globalist establishment is going to allow that to happen if they have anything to do with it.
In this discussion of geopolitical hotspots, you've talked about things that we don't get talked about, which is the globalist connections behind the funding for wars and the knockoff effects of saying, oh, these crises have to be dealt with, and it always ends up being a loss of freedom, such as the Patriot Act and so on. In this case, there's also another aspect we wanted to touch on. We've had several questions by Red Go Gray in our submitted before your arrival, talking about the plight of different ethnic groups in the Middle East that we don't hear about. For example, we hear about, okay, there's an existential threat to Israel, but what about the 98% almost complete elimination of Christians in Palestine, for example? We have visitors periodically have come to our church over the decades with olive wood carvings, trying to sell them to support the few remaining beleaguered Christians still living in the Middle East. Can you talk to us about some of the unspoken or unsung people who are suffering there that we don't hear about? And if it's the Palestinian people in general, or if it's the Palestinian Christians, what is it that we're not hearing about those that are suffering in the Middle East?
Yeah, well, it almost seems like U.S. foreign policy is calculated to make life miserable for everybody, right? And people talk a lot about the billions of dollars that the U.S. government gives to the government of Israel. What's talked about a lot less is the 3 times as many billions of dollars given to the Islamic governments around Israel, some of which are openly sworn to destroy it. And there's that famous meme, the missiles coming up, and it says, my tax dollars at work. And then there's the response missiles taking them out that says, somehow also my tax dollars. Like, that's literally what's going on in the Middle East right now. The U.S. government is funding both sides of almost all these conflicts and has been doing it for a long time, and also stirring up and agitating for this propaganda. And one of the most affected groups, of course, has been Christians. I did what I consider to be one of my most important articles over a decade ago. It was a cover story in the New American. It's available for anybody who wants to see it. Just use your favorite search engine. It was called Christian Massacres, U.S. Foreign Policy. I'll have to get the exact title. But what it was a look at the different U.S. foreign policy actions over the last few decades around the world, not just in the Middle East, but also in Africa. And the thing that they all had in common, right, whether it was Syria, whether it was Iraq, whether it was Libya, whether it was the Ivory Coast, whether it was Afghanistan, they all had in common the same thing: the utter destruction of Christian communities that in some cases have been there for 2,000 years, right? Like Iraq is a really good example. There were millions of practicing Christians in Iraq when the U.S. government invaded. George Bush was warned that those communities were going to suffer like no one else as a result of the invasion. He did it anyway. Right. A lot of those Christians had to flee the country. They went to Syria, where they were then exterminated in Syria. So we see you almost couldn't come up with a better foreign policy to undermine Christianity and the church if you were trying to do it deliberately. And as our great Secretary of War, James Forrestal, put it in regards to our support for communist governments, our betrayal of anti-communist governments over the years, consistency has never been a hallmark of stupidity, right? If these men were merely stupid, they would occasionally make a mistake in our favor, and yet they never do, right? That's exactly what we're seeing with the U.S. government's foreign policy. And I think Donald Trump is trying to change some of that, but he's finding it very difficult because the institutional momentum is so strong. it really is unbelievably tragic what has happened to Christians as a direct result of American foreign policy. I certainly sympathize with the Israelis. They're surrounded by governments that are, in many cases, like I said, sworn to their destruction. But if the U.S. government is that concerned about the state of Israel, you would think thing number one to do would be stop giving billions of dollars to governments that say they're going to wipe you off the map. I mean, that's just basic common sense 101. And so what that leads me to believe is that the U.S. government wants these things happening. You see it with the UNRWA. Right? Until Donald Trump pulled the funding of this thing, this institution was brainwashing little Arab children to believe, and you can read their textbooks, that they need to wipe the Jews off the map from the river to the sea. Palestine is going to be free. That's crazy talk. We cannot talk about removing an entire nation from the face of the earth, and yet American tax dollars were paying to indoctrinate young children to believe in something so kooky. So I think the U.S. government has been an incredible force for evil all around the world for generations. And I don't say that lightly because I'm a patriot. I love my country. But the reality is our government has been completely out of control. It's been completely hijacked by hostile forces that don't agree with the principles our country was founded on. And the people paying the price are not just the Americans who are taxed to do all this, but especially the Christians and other minorities, not just in the Middle East, but all over the world.
Turning the attention to U.S. domestically, there's a concern here from a viewer who is referring to the uncontrolled border situation for most of the past 16 plus years, that has, at some estimates, says there's 50 million undocumented people from third world countries have been imported to America. What is your plan for when the 50 plus million people from third world countries that have been imported to America vote your rights away and want absolutely nothing to do with your libertarian ideals?
That's a very good question. And of course, I think that was one of the big reasons why they brought all these people here. I interviewed Tom Homan, who's currently the border czar, just a couple of years ago about this. And he said that was the primary motivation. They wanted a new electorate so they could steal elections and basically do to the United States what they did to California. But I actually think it's much bigger than that. Right? I think it's actually an effort to collapse the United States and bring about a civil war. They knew. We've got the documents from Congress. They knew that they were letting in special forces from the People's Liberation Army. They knew that they were letting in people on the terrorist watch list, jihadists from across the Middle East who were coming here for the specific purpose of unleashing chaos. The Iranians, the Venezuelans, the Cubans have been sending people here by the thousands for years. And the Biden administration has been deliberately allowing them to do it. They've been sending children over for sex trafficking programs. We just had a former Border Patrol agent testify in Congress, I think just last week, saying that the U.S. government is the largest child trafficking organization in the history of the world. So when you realize that what you see on TV is not true, and that the political class absolutely hates you. They hate your country. They hate the values that your country was founded on. Suddenly, the open border makes a lot more sense. So we've got to get all these things under control. I have tremendous sympathy, Dunnigan, for immigrants. I've lived almost my entire life as an immigrant in other countries, mostly Latin America, then Europe, then Africa, then back to Europe. I mean, almost my whole life, I've been an immigrant. And people have always been kind to me, and I've been grateful for that. I'm married to an immigrant who came here legally, as you know. And so I've got a lot of sympathy for immigrants, and I feel bad that Joe Biden basically told the world, hey, come to America, we're going to let you in. But we have to get this situation under control. We have to restore law and order. We have to get the border back under control. And I think Trump's doing a good job of that. But it is going to be a Herculean effort to undo the damage that Joe Biden has done. And I'm very concerned that there's enough sleeper cells, enough highly trained operatives here with access to the blueprints for our water treatment facilities, our power plants, sensitive installations, that they're going to unleash absolute havoc before we're able to actually get control of this situation.
Also, you mentioned before about your belief in a coming economic disruption of major proportions that people should be planning towards and preparing towards. We have a question from a viewer here. When the dollar and economy crash, what legitimate concerns should the average citizen have regarding how all levels of government will behave?
Well, we've seen this movie endless numbers of times all throughout human history, right? You have a major crisis, and then the people who caused the crisis pose as the saviors, right? And I think right now we're at a unique moment in the history of the world where we're headed toward a truly global crisis, right? And what we're going to see when that happens. I was at the the Summit for the Future meeting at New York headquarters last September, and one of the things that they enshrined in the Pact for the Future was the role of the UN as the central force in responding to global emergencies and global crises. So the World Economic Forum has been talking for a few years now about a polycrisis. So what I expect to see in the years ahead, and nobody can know exactly how this is going to play out. I don't even think the people plotting it fully know how it's going to play out yet. But I think they will throw crisis after crisis after crisis at us. A currency crisis, a economic crisis, environmental crises, World War III type crises, if not world war, at least regional war, expanded beyond what we're seeing, possibly another pandemic, possibly some sort of threat from outer space is one of the things that the Secretary General mentioned in his policy brief back in 2023. And so you combine all that together and people are just terrified, right? Whatever it takes to make this stop, to make the grocery stores full again, to, let me, get back to my job and watching my football, whatever it takes, I'm willing to accept it. And so when you start seeing these crises coming into view, and then you start seeing the governments of the world telling you that the only solution is to give up your freedom, to give up your national sovereignty, to give more power and authority to the very megalomaniacs who cause these things, not only should you be alarmed, you should have a very clear and very simple answer. No, right? A lot of people around the world saying no is what stopped the crazy just a few years ago, or at least tempered the level of crazy that we could get to. We're going to need to have a backbone and have a spine and say no, even when it's very unpopular, even when it might mean your neighbors are going to turn on you, even when it might mean people might report you, right? If we don't have the courage to stand for freedom, for family, for faith, in the midst of a crisis, we're going to lose all of those things. And so I would encourage people to study, get right with God, prepare as best you can, physically, morally, spiritually, and don't be scared. Don't be panicked. They want you to panic. In fact, that is a central element of their plan. Crisis equals panic. So don't panic. And the better prepared you are, the more you understand what's coming, the less likely you will be to panic. And that means the less likely you will be to make really dumb decisions that could cost you everything.
From a practical standpoint of that portion of preparedness about gold and silver, sound money, the ability to have something of lasting value if the currency gets destroyed, which it already is getting destroyed in front of our eyes in a continual basis. There's a question from George Montgomery who says, do you think we will have a dollar reset while Trump is yet in office? States want to use gold and silver as money. Is there a devil in the details that we should know?
I think it's very possible. I was actually at the signing ceremony just a few weeks ago when Ron DeSantis, my governor, signed into law transactional gold. And I was very pleased to see that. I think this is a really important development to give us some maybe options as the Federal Reserve System kind of crashes and burns, if you will. So I've been pleased to see, and Texas just became the latest one. I spoke quite extensively with Mark D'Orazio, the lawmaker who shepherded that through the legislature there. I've spoken very extensively with Kevin Freeman, kind of the mastermind behind all this. And I think it's a very, very good idea for preserving purchasing power and also making sure that there's an alternative system where if the Federal Reserve fake system goes down, we have other ways of exchanging that are lawful, that are backed by our state governments. And so I think that's actually a really encouraging development. And I also know that Trump thinks highly of gold. He's spoken on this very publicly for well over a decade, what they've done to our dollar, how desirable it would be to have a gold-backed dollar. I suspect that they're getting ready for something huge. And I think there are several ways it could go, right? You get a polycrisis, and either humanity comes to its senses and we go back to sound money and all those great things, or the globalists take that as the opportunity to finally unveil their global currency and their central bank digital currencies. And right now, I don't think any of us can tell which way it's going to go. And I don't think the future is necessarily written in stone yet. So I think we can have some influence over which way that goes. I do think Trump's instincts are largely good on these issues. And so I'm glad that he's in the White House at the moment, especially compared to some of the other options that were available. But we would be very foolish and naive to not think that there will be people trying to manipulate Trump through a crisis like we saw during COVID into making really dumb decisions. And I think the people who want to control our lives understand very well that as fiat currency loses the confidence of not just the American people, but people around the world. They're going to have to come up with, well, we're going to back our new special drawing rights with 25% gold as opposed to the usual dollars and rubles and whatever. And so there's a risk that people could be lulled into complacency to say, oh, finally, we're going back to gold-backed money. No. It's the same scam as before, just with a fake, little bit of backing by gold. So we've got to be careful. We've got to be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves here, because we're headed into, I think, some very difficult times, some times that are going to be very confusing. And so I would encourage everybody to, again, be in prayer, have grace for other people, and really study these issues, money, investment, all these different issues that are going to come to the fore in the years ahead.
When you talk about a polycrisis, it reminds me of a scene from near the end of the Truman Show, if anybody has seen that, where the character, our hero that we're trying to cheer for, who's desperately striving to reach freedom, to escape this entrapping, this lying world that he finds himself in, is trying to sail away in a boat, and the director who's in charge of this whole containment system that's been controlling him is ordering lightning strikes on his boat, and he says, hit him again, hit him again, hit him again. And every time it looks like he's finally taken all he can take, and no, he's still alive. Okay, hit him again. And it's like, what is it going to take to drive this person to his knees? And he makes a statement. He said, well, if he really wants his freedom, we can't stop him. And it reminds me of what you're saying, is we've got to be filled with fortitude of God, and have a plan, and have real networks with, as people have said, real assets, real skills, real friendships and relationships, in order to have a prepared, effective response against a collusion, because it truly does appear that in many ways we're behind enemy lines, and you've outlined a number of ways that that's actually more accurate than thinking that we live in a benign environment. But nobody ever told us this was still the Garden of Eden. We live in a fallen world. We're going to have to pick ourselves up, and it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you stand up again. So thank you, Alex, for being here to exhort us to be prepared, make connections, learn what we need to learn, get the skills, get the assets, and be prepared. And some of these things may be coming faster than most people realize. Just saw a video about the advent of AI replacing many more types of vocations than people may realize in the next 1 to 5 years, and what will become of people psychologically, sociologically, and economically if we have huge swaths of people who got their college degree or got their training, whatever, and now they're not needed anymore for that. That job is now obsolete. Any final thoughts on that before we wrap?
Well, I think that is a really important thing for people to be considering right now, right? And that's one very good reason to pull your children out of the indoctrination camps masquerading as public schools and make sure they get a real education. Now, if your children cannot think critically, if they can't think properly, if they can't reason, they're going to be in a world of hurt as AI takes away a lot of the traditional job paths that were available. I've got my children in classical conversations. It's a great option. I think classical education, where children are learning how to think, is going to be one of the most important determining factors in determining who succeeds in this new world that we're going into and who ends up under the boot of government, depending on a universal basic income. So I would encourage people, really spend some time. It's one of the most important decisions you will make in your life, is how your children are educated. Do not trust the same government that you know is corrupt, that you know is out of control, to shape the hearts and minds of your children. Just to close out, the ignorance and the fear are the two things that the totalitarians are counting on to be able to advance their agenda. The more we educate ourselves and educate our children and educate our communities, and the more prepared we are so that we don't have to cower in fear when the latest boogeyman appears on our TV, the less likely they will be to get their way, and the more likely we will be to be able to preserve freedom and everything good down for the next generation.
Simple example, I have to give a shout out to my wife, who has always done the health and wellness research for our household, and that is that, when we heard, oh gosh, there's this new COVID variant that's coming out, and now it's the latest creature unleashed from that in Wuhan that's coming our way, it's the razor throat variant, or the next one after that's going to be 8 times more lethal, or whatever, that she says, well, it looks like we're going to have to start taking our colloidal silver. We got to make sure our vitamin D3 is up. We got to have to keep our vitamin C up. We got to do our N-acetylcholine to make sure that we have all our immune system built. And she's got some more that I can't remember, some herbs. All of these things, if you have the education, if you have the preparedness, if you know what to do to take care of yourself, it does reduce a lot of that knee-jerk sort of reptilian anxiety reflex where you go, okay, well, then save me, and I'll give away my freedom. Good points. And folks, if you have any comments about this video, don't hesitate to add them below this video. That's what that's meant for. Let's keep it civil. Let's make sure that it's not ad hominem attacks against either our channel, our host, our guest, or each other, but about the issues and what we need to do to support each other on better preparedness. Please share this video widely. And Alex, for people who want to follow your work, and you appear all over the place, where should they get connected?
Well, thank you, Dan. Again, honor and pleasure to join you. My personal website, libertysentinel.org. People can sign up for the free newsletter there. We send it out twice a week. I'm on X, AlexNewman_JOU, and then thenewamerican.com is the New American magazine. Great ways to stay informed and regular here on your program. So thank you very much, Donegan, for all you do.
And thanks for spending this time with us. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Make sure you do like, subscribe, and share this widely. Thank you, Alex.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 30th to July 6th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, we feature backdated 1/10-ounce gold maples at just $45 over melt per coin. Next, 1-ounce silver Swiss Pamp rounds are just $2.59 over spot per ounce. 90% mixed junk constitutional silver is only 99 cents over spot. And finally, backdated 1-ounce platinum platypus coins are just $119 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.